Hello and welcome to the Markets, Trends and Profits channel. With escalating tensions between Russia and the West, we keep hearing about Munich and about appeasement of Nazi Germany that led to World War II. But the truth of those events remained largely misunderstood. As one meme doing rounds on the social media says, if the news are fake, imagine how bad history is. To avoid sleepwalking into another great war, it is essential that we understand what really happened in the late 1930s, and it's nothing like they taught us in school. In today's report, we'll shed light on that hidden history. Buckle in, this will change how you look at the world, but before we begin, please indulge me for a 1-minute promotional message. I'm Alex Kreiner, former hedge fund manager and publisher of the iSystem Trend Compass reports. During my 15 years as a money manager, I've traded in over 50 different financial and commodities markets, and I've consistently outperformed my strategy benchmarks, including the world's leading blue-chip trend-following funds. I was able to do this thanks to iSystem Trend Following. iSystem is an AI trend following model I developed in 1999, and I've used it ever since. It reduces the complexity of daily market analysis to clear, actionable decisions. Why trend following? Because market trends are far and away the most powerful drivers of investment performance, and trend following is the most reliable way to profit from them. Today, you can benefit from iSystem Trend Following thanks to my daily Trend Compass reports, which cover more than 200 financial and commodities markets, enabling you to navigate trends profitably with confidence and peace of mind, both in bull and bear markets. Subscription rates start at below €85 per month, and the first month is always free of charge. To learn more or request a free trial, please visit our webpage or drop me an email. The links are included in the description below this video. On Friday, 12 November, Poland's Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak announced that the UK deployed a squad of British soldiers to Poland, allegedly to help repair border fences that were breached by Middle Eastern migrants. The very same day, a group of US congressmen urged President Joe Biden to provide advanced weapons to Ukraine and deploy US troops to the region. Only 2 days later, the UK Chief of Defence Staff, General Sir Nick Carter, stated that the UK military would have to be ready for war with Russia. Britain also announced that it would enhance a permanent presence of troops and tanks in Germany to face the Russian threat. Hundreds of vehicles, including tanks and drones, will be deployed to Germany. More troops and some 250 military vehicles could also be deployed to Estonia, where Britain is in charge of a 1,000-strong battle group on a mission to deter Russian aggression. This escalation has followed years of deteriorating relations between Russia and the Western powers, but it was the deployment of British troops to Poland and Germany that invoked the most disconcerting parallels with the events leading to World War II. Some of the war hawks in the West have seized on those parallels to further inflame the rhetoric. Referring to Vladimir Putin, US Congressman Adam Kinzinger said, "We can retreat from the Sudetenland and hope that he doesn't intend to rebuild all the Soviet Union." The not-so-subtle insinuation in that statement was that today Ukraine is Sudetenland, that Vladimir Putin is Hitler, and that the West must confront him decisively and with force if necessary. The analogy is completely off mark, but since it is now being thrown about casually, we should be clear about exactly what happened in the late 1930s. What we're about to explore is largely based on Carroll Quigley's book Tragedy and Hope, published by Macmillan and Company in 1966. The book is a massive study of the Western world's history from 1895 to 1965. It reveals the hidden powers that have shaped the history of the world in that time. Quigley was a historian and a professor at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. He also taught at many institutions, including Princeton and Harvard universities, at the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, at the Brookings Institution, and the Foreign Service Institute of the US State Department. Quigley conducted extensive research in the archives of France, Italy, United States, and Great Britain. As a trusted member of the Council of Foreign Relations, he was allowed to research through the Council's secret archives, enabling him to write one of the most important and most revealing history books ever written. Tragedy and Hope is perhaps best exemplified by the passage that is today quoted quite frequently. The powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. The growth of financial capitalism made possible a centralization of world economic control and use of this power to the direct benefit of financiers and the direct injury of all other groups. In his 1,300-plus pages, Quigley meticulously traces historical events that abundantly corroborate that alarming assertion. Of course, the powers he exposed wanted to remain hidden, and when they discovered the contents of Quigley's book, it soon vanished from the bookstores, and its publisher even destroyed the book's original printing plates. Fortunately, it was republished in 2004, and today it remains as relevant as ever. Over the intervening years, as countless official documents became declassified, historians have been able to extract much of the previously obscured details, giving us a more accurate version of history than the sanitized narrative they taught us in school. Another book I should mention is Guido Giacomo Preparata's Conjuring Hitler, which is much shorter, but which I could not recommend highly enough. It is truly a masterful work. Today, we'll look at the real history before and after the 1938 appeasement. As we do so, please keep in mind that at the time Britain was the dominant power in the world diplomacy, exerting disproportionate policy influence in Europe and much of the world. It controlled the maritime trade routes and the flow of capital through London, which reigned still as the world's financial capital. Nearly all governments in Europe conducted foreign policy in consultations with London. As Carol Quigley wrote, "In general, the key to everything was the position of Britain." Because Poland could today become one of the key geopolitical flashpoints, we'll begin our story with Britain's 1939 guarantee of Poland, and then we'll work back to the appeasement in Munich. Following the destruction of Czechoslovakia in September 1938, Germany turned its attention to Poland. At first, it was just diplomacy. The talks with Poland kicked off on 21 October 1938. As expected, the Germans asked the Polish government for the city of Danzig and a kilometer-wide strip across the Polish corridor to accommodate for a highway and a 4-track railroad under German sovereignty. These were deemed moderate requests as they were made to the Polish ally in a relatively cordial atmosphere. The territories in question were parts of Germany that she lost at Versailles Treaty after the World War I, so the German demands didn't seem outrageous. At that time, Hitler did not intend to overrun Poland, but rather to engage her in the future onslaught against Russia. If his demands were granted, Germany was prepared to reciprocate with certain concessions to Poland. However, the Polish government did not yield to Hitler's demand. A few months later, on 21 March 1939, Hitler reiterated his demand, this time more forcefully. When the news of this reached London, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain suddenly and unilaterally issued a strangely worded security guarantee for Poland. Certain consultations are now proceeding with other governments. In order to make perfectly clear the position of His Majesty's government in the meantime, before those consultations are concluded, I now have to inform the House of Commons that during that period, in the event of any action which clearly threatened the Polish independence, and which the Polish government accordingly considered it vital to resist with their national forces, His Majesty's government would feel themselves bound at once to lend the Polish government all support in their power. This was the first time since 1918 that Britain made such a commitment to another nation. Not only did the British government commit to guaranteeing Poland, it also gave Poland the discretion to decide when the guarantee would take effect, while asking for nothing in return. However, Chamberlain's wording only referred to Poland's independence, not its territorial integrity, leaving the door wide open for Germany to continue pressuring Poland for territorial concessions. Britain's guarantee emboldened the Polish government to harden their stance vis-à-vis Germany in the mistaken belief that Britain and France would have unleashed a full-scale offensive against Germany if Hitler dared strike at Poland. Unaware of the British guarantee at first, Hitler was surprised by Poland's sudden defiance. But if the intention of the guarantee was to deter Germany, its effect was exactly the opposite. When Hitler did learn about it, he immediately decided to attack Poland. During a secret conference with his generals on 23 May 1939, Hitler said that the Polish problem is inseparable from the conflict with the West. Poland sees danger in German victory in the West and will attempt to rob us of a victory there. There is therefore no question of sparing Poland, and we are left with the decision to attack Poland at the first suitable opportunity. The plan was to launch the attack before September 1939. But apart from the verbal guarantee, Britain did next to nothing to ensure Poland's security. It made no real effort to build up a defense front with Poland, and no military arrangements were made as to how Britain and Poland would cooperate in a war. Britain's effort to rearm Poland were delivered late in inadequate amounts and in an unworkable form. At the same time, it continued to provide very substantial support to Germany. In May 1939, when Chamberlain issued this guarantee, there was talk about a £100 million loan to Poland, but the British stalled and delayed, delivering far too little and far too late. Poland finally obtained a small credit of just over $8 million only 1 month before the German invasion. At the same time, as Quigley writes, all London was buzzing about a secret loan of £1 billion from Britain to Germany, more than 100 times the meager credit extended to Poland. The rumors were in fact corroborated by Hitler himself. Speaking about these events in August 1942, he said, "Schacht told me that we had at our disposal a credit of 1,500 million marks abroad, and it was on this basis that I planned my 4-year plan, which never caused me the slightest anxiety. And this is how things are today, and we never find ourselves blocked for money." The Schacht that Hitler was referring to was his economy minister Hjalmar Schacht, former Wall Street banker, head of the Reichsbank, and a very close associate of Bank of England's chief Montagu Norman. Far from discouraging German aggression, British actions only bolstered Hitler in his determination. In a meeting with his general on 22nd August 1939, Hitler said, "The following is the characteristic of England. Poland wanted a loan from England for rearmament. England, however, gave only a credit to make sure that Poland buys in England, although England cannot deliver. This means that England does not really want to support Poland." Indeed, Hitler was right. Britain did not sign a formal alliance with Poland until 25 August 1939, the very day when Hitler ordered the invasion, and far too late. At a time when the British public opinion was deeply opposed to Nazi Germany, that move was intended more to reassure the British sentiment at home than to provide any meaningful support to Poland. The fact that Britain did have the influence to change the course of events was immediately apparent. Upon learning of the British-Polish alliance, the stubborn, intransigent Hitler reversed his order to invade Poland only a few hours after he had issued them. Unfortunately, the pause wasn't used to sue for peace, and the invasion went ahead after only a week's delay on September 1, 1939. All these events beg the question, why did Britain so consistently miss every chance to restrain Hitler and to preserve peace on the continent? Why did the British and American banks and corporations provide such abundant support to Nazi Germany, even when it was clear that most of this support was being used for rearmament? We can discern the answers to these questions in the wider agenda behind their geopolitics. Keeping up the appearance of trying to restrain Hitler while covertly aiding and abetting him was the hallmark of British secret diplomacy throughout much of the 1930s. The covert support for Hitler was in fact part of the larger three-block world agenda. After the Munich conference in September 1938, Lord Halifax, who was one of the main protagonists of the British foreign policy, revealed how the ruling establishment planned those three blocks. They envisioned Germany as the dominant power on the continent with predominant rights in southeastern Europe, Britain dominating Euro-Atlantic West in alliance with the United States, and securing Far Eastern dominions through an alliance with Japan. In this vision of a new global order, Germany would be built up and supported not only as a dominating power in Central and Eastern Europe, but also as a bludgeon to wield against Russia. With that objective in mind, British foreign policy establishment had formulated a 7-point policy towards Germany, which was communicated to German officials by various spokesmen from 1937 onward. 1. Hitler's Germany was the front-line bulwark against the spread of communism in Europe. 2. A four-power pact of Britain, France, Italy, and Germany to prevent all Russian influence in Europe was the ultimate objective. Accordingly, Britain had no desire to weaken the Rome-Berlin axis. 3. Britain had no objection to German acquisition of Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Danzig. 4. Germany must not use force to achieve its aims in Europe, as this could precipitate a war in which Britain would have to intervene because of the pressure of public opinion in Britain and the French system of alliances. With patience, Germany could get its aims without using force. 5. Britain wanted an agreement with Germany restricting the number and use of bombing planes. 6. Britain was prepared conditionally to give Germany colonial areas in South-Central Africa, including the Belgian Congo and the Portuguese Angola. 7. Britain would use pressure on Czechoslovakia and Poland to negotiate with Germany and to be conciliatory to Germany's desire. After the Munich crisis and dismemberment of Czechoslovakia, an 8th point was added to the program, which entailed economic support for Germany. With this in mind, we can better understand the mystery of Britain's support for Germany's annexation of Austria, the destruction of Czechoslovakia, and invasion of Poland. This was all driven by a covert policy that deliberately created a monster in the heart of Europe. But British policy went beyond mere passive appeasement. In fact, as we look at the true story about the sacrifice of Czechoslovakia to this monster, it becomes clear that Britain's secret diplomacy not only supported Hitler, but actually directed the events from behind the stages. The treacherous sacrifice of Czechoslovakia to Germany is one of the least well understood episodes leading to the tragedy of World War II. Conventional history associates the Czech crisis with Neville Chamberlain's appeasement at Munich. The story we learned in school was that the British government agreed to partition Czechoslovakia only as a desperate measure to avoid a greater European war. This view is based on the idea that Germany was already an overwhelming military power that could easily crush Czechoslovakia's weak defenses. However, this idea is patently false. In late 1938, Czechoslovakia did in fact capitulate without resistance, but this was not because her defenses were weak. Rather, the Czech government was paralyzed and sedated as a result of treacherous scheming of Britain's secret diplomacy. Created in 1919, Czechoslovakia was the most prosperous, most democratic, most powerful, and best administered of the states that emerged from the Habsburg Empire. Situated along its northwest frontier with Germany, the Sudeten region was the most industrialized part of the country and had a majority German population. Although Czechoslovakia instituted equitable treatment for all of its minorities, in the 1930s Sudeten Germans began to press for greater political power and autonomy within Czechoslovakia. They established their own Nazi party, and with funding from Berlin, their relentless agitation and propaganda became a destabilizing factor in the nation. In 1934, the Czech government finally banned the party, but under Konrad Henlein's leadership, they only changed the party's name to Sudeten German Party and continued to consolidate influence and power. Henlein coordinated his party's agenda with Hitler, and their strategy was to keep pressing the Czech government for ever greater concessions, which escalated the crisis to a boiling point in 1938. Conventional history holds that Britain only became involved in the crisis in order to prevent a greater war from erupting. The Wikipedia entry says that Germany had started a low-intensity undeclared war on Czechoslovakia on 17 September 1938. In reaction, the United Kingdom and France on 20th September formally asked Czechoslovakia to cede its territory to Germany. That pretty much sums up history as it is still being taught in schools everywhere. The truth, however, is very different. As early as March 1938, and until the very end, British representatives took a very active role in the negotiations between the Germans and the Czech government. Behind the false cloak of impartiality, the British representatives consistently bolstered German demands and pressured the Czechs to yield. The Czech government responded by offering substantial concessions and formulated plans for the minorities that included economic benefits, cultural and administrative autonomy, and even political federalism. These were, however, brushed aside by the German and British counterparts as inadequate. Then, on 24 April 1938, Henlein formulated the extreme Carlsbad demands. After months of torturous negotiations and under severe pressure from Britain, in September 1938 the Czech government yielded on most of these demands. But at that point, rather than declaring victory and accepting a settlement, Henlein abruptly broke off negotiations and fled to Germany. History regards Chamberlain's 1938 appeasement of Hitler as an ill-advised and cowardly policy, but ultimately a justifiable or at least well-intentioned bid to prevent a greater European war. The Czech situation was invariably presented as a lost cause, since the overwhelming power of the German Wehrmacht could easily crush Czechoslovakia's weak defenses. But the idea that the Germans had a military advantage and that the Czech security was weak was a fabrication of a sustained propaganda campaign, which was orchestrated by the British media and the government representatives to mislead the British and European public. To be sure, Germany had been building up its military power since the early 1930s, but in 1938 it was still no match for Czech defenses. The Germans had 35 infantry divisions and only 4 motorized divisions, none of them fully manned or equipped. Of these, only 22 partially trained divisions were stationed near the Czech border. At the same time, Czechoslovakia had 34 well-equipped divisions and was able to mobilize and arm fully 1 million troops. Apart from a handful of 18-ton Mark III tanks, all of Germany's tanks were below 10 tons, armed with 37mm guns. The Czechs had hundreds of 38-ton tanks armed with 75mm cannons. Moreover, the Czech army was better trained, had very high morale, and had built powerful fortifications along its borders. In terms of quality, armaments and fortifications, the Czech army was known to be the best in Europe and was superior to German army in every way except for air support. On September 3, 1938, the British military attaché in Prague wrote a cable to London stating, "There are no shortcomings in the Czech army as far as I have been able to observe." In addition to its military strength, Czech security was supported by strategic alliances with France and the Soviet Union, both of whom were at that time very keen on holding Germany in check, and both of whom were significantly superior to Germany in terms of military power. German military leaders were well aware of all of this and believed that even without her alliances, Czechoslovakia could easily defeat German army in any military confrontation. When on 21 April 1938 Hitler ordered General Wilhelm Keitel to draw up plans to invade Czechoslovakia, German military brass were deeply alarmed, so much so that a group of top commanders clustered around Hitler's own chief of the general staff, General Ludwig Beck, hatched a three-phase strategy to disrupt Hitler's reckless pursuit. First, they would try to dissuade Hitler from attacking Czechoslovakia. Second, they implored Britain to stand firm with Czechoslovakia and to warn Hitler that Britain would oppose him. And third, if Hitler persisted in his resolve to wage war, they would proceed to assassinate him. The date for this act was set for September 28, 1938. During the frenzied first 2 weeks of that month, message after message was communicated to London by Baron Ernst von Weizsäcker, who was the state secretary in Hitler's foreign ministry, by von Ribbentrop's chief of staff Erich Kort, as well as by a number of generals and various representatives of German missions around Europe. However, not only did the British ignore all these pleas for help, they even took measures to shield Hitler from General Beck's conspiracy. Chamberlain himself flew to Germany twice during the peak of the crisis on the 15th and 22nd September 1938 in order to broker an agreement that would enable Hitler to seize Czechoslovakia without waging war. Britain's covert diplomacy was run by a small group of men led by Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, and it included Lord Halifax, Sir Horace Wilson, Sir John Simon, Lord Runciman, and Sir Samuel Hoare. Their objective was to advance the three-block vision of the global order, which entailed securing Germany's hegemony over Central and Eastern Europe. The plan for Czechoslovakia, as presented by Lord Halifax to the Czech ambassador in London on 25 May 1938, included three key provisions. 1. Separation of the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. 2. Neutralization of the rest of Czechoslovakia by revising her treaties with Russia and France. And 3. An international guarantee of the rump Czechoslovakia, but not by Britain. That, in fact, was the same arrangement that would ultimately be forced on the Czechs by the Four-Power Conference in Munich on 30th September 1938. For the British, it was essential to achieve these objectives without a war. As Herbert von Dirksen, Germany's ambassador to London, wrote to Joachim von Ribbentrop on 8 June 1938, anything which can be got without a shot being fired can count upon the agreement of the British. To facilitate this, Chamberlain maneuvered the Czechs to yield without resistance. Avoiding war was important for a number of reasons, but primarily to prevent a strong public outcry in Britain and to preempt Russia and France from coming to Czechoslovakia's aid. Moscow's efforts to intervene were consistently ignored and played down in the public. Already in March 1938, the Russians tried to form a united front against Hitler and proposed holding a security conference in Bucharest along with France, Britain, Poland and Romania, but this initiative was ignored. The French position was neutered through the Anglo-French Conference of September 18, 1938, where the British persuaded the French to back their solution to the Czech crisis and to help pressure the Czechs to yield. Chamberlain's cabal also needed to sell all this to the British public, which was viscerally opposed to Nazism. Accordingly, British officials and the media launched the propaganda campaign that gathered pace throughout the crisis. The opening salvo was an article in Lord Rothermere's Daily Mail, published on 6 May 1938. It denounced Czechoslovakia as an aberration and an artificial monstrosity. It also falsely accused the hateful Czechs of mistreating the German-speaking population, an outrage that Britain could not tolerate. In addition to demonizing Czechoslovakia, the media also fomented a general war scare. Anxiety about the relentless German war mobilization was built up day by day, reaching fever pitch by September of 1938. British public was made to believe that German Air Force might imminently launch raids against Paris and London, and that they would bomb the civilian population with poison gas ordnance. As panic set in, the British public services began to fit people with gas masks, while the King and Prime Minister called on the Britons to dig trenches in the parks and squares of London. School children began to be evacuated to secure detention facilities away from the city. Every report or rumor that exacerbated the panic and defeatism was played up, and any voice that encouraged taking a decisive stand against Germany was sidelined. At the same time, France and Britain ordered the Czech government not to mobilize its troops for fear of provoking Germany and pressured them to accept the Anglo-French solution to the crisis. But the Anglo-French proposal would only further weaken Czechoslovakia's security in exchange for vague promises of international guarantees. The government of President Edvard Beneš protested vigorously and rejected the solution. In their turn, London and Paris rejected the Czech refusal and mounted further pressure on the Czechoslovakia's government. Chamberlain explained the imperative of forcing the Czechs to yield. The idea of territorial cession would be likely to have a more favorable reception from the British public if it could be presented as the choice of the Czechoslovak government themselves, and it could be made clear that they had been offered the choice of a plebiscite or of a territorial cession and had preferred the latter. This would dispose of any idea that we were ourselves carving up Czechoslovak territory. To turn up the pressure, France threatened to revoke their alliance and abandon Czechoslovakia to Germany. Finally, on 21 September 1938, the Czech government relented and accepted the Anglo-French dictate. The very next day, Chamberlain paid Hitler a visit at Godesberg on the Rhine in order to personally deliver the good news. At that meeting, Hitler and Chamberlain formulated yet another set of even more extreme demands and had the British military attaché rush these demands to Prague. The Godesberg ultimatum was ostensibly Hitler's own brainchild, but more likely it was godfathered by Chamberlain himself. Hitler now inexplicably demanded self-determination not only for the Sudeten Germans, but also for the Poles, Hungarians and the Slovaks. In addition, German troops were to enter Czechoslovakia before October 1, 1938, and occupy territories within borders that would be determined at Hitler's own discretion. Back in London, on 23 September, the British cabinet overtly rejected Hitler's Godesberg ultimatum and agreed to support France if it chose to go to war against Germany. The French government also rejected Hitler's ultimatum, as did the Czechs. The Soviets responded by explicitly reiterating their security commitment to Czechoslovakia. However, this last-moment appearance of a united front against Germany finally shaping up was yet another deception. On 27 September 1938, Chamberlain delivered a radio address to the nation feigning his dismay at the incomprehensible events on the continent. How horrible, fantastic, incredible it is that we should be digging trenches and trying on gas masks here because of a quarrel in a faraway country between people of whom we know nothing. That very same day, Chamberlain sent a telegram to Czechoslovakia's President Beneš, warning him that if he failed to accept Hitler's ultimatum by 2 p.m. on the following day, Czechoslovakia would be overrun by the German military and nothing could save her. After that, Chamberlain sent a message to Hitler proposing to hold a four-power conference and reassuring him that Britain and France would force Czechoslovakia to accept any agreement on condition that Germany abstained from going to war. The following day, on 28 September 1938 at 3 p.m., Chamberlain appeared at the House of Commons where he gave a long speech about the events in Europe. His speech caused great consternation among the members of Parliament who sat aghast, wondering if Göring's bombs were about to start raining down on London. In a theatrical stunt near the end of his speech, a message was brought to him, and he announced at once that it was an invitation to a four-power conference in Munich. Chamberlain forgot to mention that he himself had organized that conference, but the MPs were not in the mood to question the good news. They erupted in a roar of relief, and Chamberlain immediately hurried from the building without a formal ending of the session. In Munich on 30th September 1938, Chamberlain, Hitler, Mussolini and Francis Daladier carved up Czechoslovakia without consulting anyone, least of all the Czechs. The Four Powers Agreement was handed to the Czech minister in Berlin, who had been waiting outside the door for over 10 hours. It reached Prague only 18 hours before the German occupation was to begin. The agreement provided that some designated areas of Czechoslovakia would be occupied by the German army in several stages during the first and second weeks of October 1938. The progress of the occupation would be supervised by an international commission. A joint German-Czech commission would order and supervise plebiscites and guarantee the rights of various ethnicities who would be given a 6 months grace period to move into and out of the areas designated under the agreement. Property was to be protected and none of it was to be seized by the occupying troops. The remainder of Czechoslovakia would be guaranteed by France and Britain, with Germany and Italy joining the guarantee as soon as the Polish and Hungarian minority issues had been settled. The Munich Agreement was utterly worthless. It merely put a thin veil of diplomatic civility over the real agenda, which was a brazen act of destruction of a prosperous Central European nation, with the premeditated objective of empowering Nazi Germany, pushing the people of Europe closer to one of the greatest tragedies in their history. Almost before the ink could dry on this shameful document, it was violated on every point in favor of Germany, which simply occupied whatever areas of Czechoslovakia it chose. The nation's infrastructure was severely impaired as every important railroad and highway were cut or crippled, collapsing the Czech economy. The international commission that was set up to oversee the occupation process simply rubber-stamped every decision of the German General Staff. For their neutrality, Poland and Hungary were subsequently rewarded with chunks of Czechoslovakia. Hungary obtained the southern portion of Slovakia, while Poland took the areas with a Polish minority. Czechoslovakia's Soviet alliance was abolished and the Communist Party was outlawed. As for the plebiscites, they were simply forgotten. Anti-Nazi refugees from the Sudetenland were rounded up by the new government in Prague and handed over to the Germans to be destroyed. The stipulated guarantee of the rump Czechoslovakia was ignored. All that the Munich Agreement accomplished was to give Hitler everything he wanted, but without the cost and casualties of war. As a result, Nazi Germany was made the supreme power in Central Europe, and any possibility of checking its hegemony was lost. This was exactly as Chamberlain intended it. When German troops finally overran Czechoslovakia, they captured 469 tanks, which were much superior to the German tanks, along with 1,500 planes, 43,000 machine guns, and over 1 million rifles. The unused arsenal was a testament to the power that failed to defend herself against Hitler's aggression. It was sedated and paralyzed through the devious scheming by Neville Chamberlain and his cabal. Hitler did not content himself with occupying the Sudeten region for long. Apparently, he felt that Munich Agreement cheated him out of a war and said that Munich was his first and certainly last international conference. The next time, he said, he hoped that no dirty pig would suggest a conference. By early March 1939, the German troops were poised to occupy the remainder of Czechoslovakia, and now there was nothing to stop them. On 14th March 1939, Hitler summoned Czechoslovakia's puppet president to Berlin, where he forced him to sign documents handing the nation over to Germany and ordering all resistance to the invading German forces to stand down. Within a week, Bohemia-Moravia was declared a German protectorate. Conventional history holds that the events of March 1939 finally revealed Hitler's true intentions and marked the end of the naive policy of appeasement. While this may have been true for the heavily propagandized public, it was certainly not true for the protagonist of this drama. For Chamberlain and his cabal, the events were unfolded as intended, although it was necessary to continue deceiving the British people. When Hitler occupied Czechoslovakia, clearly breaking the Munich Agreement, Chamberlain only issued a feeble protest, but on 15 March 1939 he explicitly accepted Germany's seizure of Czechoslovakia in the House of Commons and refused to accuse Hitler of bad faith. But only 2 days later, on 17 March, he went to Birmingham and denounced Hitler's actions before his constituents. And while he publicly declared the seizure as illegal, his government immediately accepted it as a fact and recognized it at law by accrediting the British Consulate General in Prague to Germany. As the public outrage mounted on 28 March 1939, Chamberlain made another gesture in announcing the cancellation of a planned visit of the British Board of Trade to Berlin and an end to the trade talks with Germany. However, true to form, only 5 days later, the German commercial attaché in London was secretly informed that the British were ready to reopen the talks. Another indication of Britain's inclinations came in May 1939, when the Bank of England's Montagu Norman turned over to Germany the £6 million in Czech gold reserves that were held in London. When the news of this transfer leaked out, the cabinet hid behind the preposterous excuse that the British government could not give orders to the Bank of England. In July 1939, the Reich Commissioner for Germany's four-year plan, Helmut Wolfstadt, visited London at an international whaling conference. This was only some 2 months after Chamberlain issued his strange guarantee of Poland's independence. On the occasion, he was approached by Chamberlain's personal representative, Sir Horace Wilson, who informed him about the proposals which the British government wished to discuss with Germany. Again, the proposals were consistent with the cabal's three-block agenda and the seven-point program for Germany. It included a non-aggression pact between Britain and Germany, a delimitation of spheres of influence, colonial concessions in Africa, an economic agreement, and a disarmament agreement. In his report to Berlin, German ambassador Herbert von Dirksen stated that Sir Horace Wilson definitely told Herr Wolfstadt that the conclusion of a non-aggression pact would enable Britain to rid herself of her commitments vis-à-vis Poland. With Czechoslovakia destroyed, Poland was next. While Nazism was defeated in World War II, at a massive cost in lives and treasure, the same structures of power that financed and empowered Hitler have retained control over the key levers of power and are continuing to shape global geopolitics to this day. They have not given up on their vision of a three-block world, which is perhaps most visibly represented by the Trilateral Commission, one of the most influential think tanks in the world. Founded in July 1973, the Trilateral Commission's aim is to foster close cooperation between Japan, Western Europe, and North America. But unlike in the 1930s, today the control of continental Europe is being pursued through the ostensibly democratic political institutions of the European Union, rather than by conquest and brute military force. Even here, however, Germany is being built up as the dominant power among the supposed equals. The EU's mission is to consolidate and centralize economic and political power and ultimately build up a military power as well. Part of this agenda includes eviscerating the sovereignty of its member states. Poland, which is today one of the strongest defenders of her national sovereignty in Europe, will continue to be in the crosshairs of the cabal's sabotage and secret diplomacy. Neville Chamberlain and his foreign policy team have been relegated to the dustbin of history where they belong, but the empire builders today continue pursuing their agenda through diplomatic, intelligence, and financial power structures. Within the EU, they are attacking nations' sovereignty from without and wearing their resolve down from within. The Trojan horse of this process are the central banks that wield predominant control over each nation's economy, while in most countries they become almost entirely independent of the legitimate democratic institutions. As Carroll Quigley wrote in 1966, each central bank sought to dominate its government by its ability to control treasury loans, to manipulate foreign exchanges, to influence the level of economic activity in the country, and to influence cooperative politicians by subsequent economic rewards in the business world. In many cases, this influence is known and openly discussed, but some of it is conducted in the shadows and is only seldom exposed under the spotlight that catch the secret diplomacy in action. One case involving Poland came to light in June 2014 when the magazine Wprost released a recording of a July 2013 meeting between the Interior Minister Bartolomiej Sienkiewicz and the central bank governor Marek Belka in a Warsaw restaurant. Some 8 months before a general election, the minister was courting the central banker's support. The ruling party was concerned that the slow economy and government's weak budget position could boost public support for the opposition Law and Justice Party. As the former Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Marek Belka was a long-standing political heavyweight in Poland and was regarded by the Western interest as a safe pair of hands in Poland. In that meeting with Sienkiewicz, he discussed non-standard support for the government and very significant change in the central bank status, but the support for the government was conditional. They would have to get rid of their finance minister, Jacek Rostowski, and replace him with a technical and apolitical minister who would find full support in the central bank. Zero Hedge provided a colorful comment. Odd, an elected government official being replaced by an unelected technocrat who get the blessing of the central bankers. Where have we seen that before? Oh wait, pretty much in every insolvent European country whose government is merely a group of sock puppets designed to perpetuate the lie of democracy, and where all the relevant decisions are made by Mario Draghi. Indeed, in spite of being named European Finance Minister of the Year by the Banker magazine in 2009, and cited as the third best finance minister by the Financial Times in 2012, the government obeyed the central bank's dictate. The Premier Donald Tusk sacked Jacek Rostowski before the elections and replaced him with the young technocrat Mateusz Szurczek. The said Mario Draghi, in the meantime, somehow became the unelected Prime Minister of Italy. Any nation intent on defending its sovereignty should be extremely vigilant about the Trojan horses within its own financial, academic, political, and military institutions. If the officialdom, already staffed with obedient technocrats, will ignore the signs of danger and even collaborate with the slow demolition of their nation's sovereignty, then the people of such nations should be doubly vigilant so they can recognize the signs of betrayal in time to take corrective action. This is all the more important today as empire builders are once more escalating political and military tensions and taking reckless risks that could ultimately lead to another world war. Tensions between powers can smolder for a long time, even to the point where we get used to them and expect that tomorrow will be much like today. But we should never be complacent about defending peace. Many times in the past, major conflicts escalated suddenly and rapidly past the point of no return. In 1915, financial journalist W.R. Lawson recalled that on the morrow of Sarajevo, not one of the political and diplomatic experts showed the slightest apprehension of the terrible sequel which deluged Europe with blood. Journalist Hartley Withers wrote that the war came upon us like a thunderbolt from a clear sky. Writing in 1925, American historian Alexander Noyes said that the suddenness with which the European war broke out in the middle of 1914, the total absence of popular belief in the possibility of any such event up to the very week in which it came, are familiar history. I myself can attest to that familiar history as well. When the war broke out in the former Yugoslavia in 1999, there was also a nearly total absence of popular belief in the possibility of any such event. Tragically, however, the event did happen. Today, we should pay close attention to the escalating tensions between global powers. For the fault line nations like Poland, the Baltic states, and Ukraine, their people should be extremely wary of being used as a battering ram in somebody else's imperial project, and should regard all foreign meddling with deep suspicion, even if it's dressed up as some harmless help fixing border fences. They should reject emotional manipulation and regard all undue demonization of their supposed enemies with discernment. They must demand truth from the media and accountability from their own policymakers. The responsibility to future generations not to repeat the mistakes of the past is today on our shoulders. Let us hope and pray that peace will prevail, but let us also do more than hope. Each and every one of us must do our part to defend peace and say a clear, resounding no to the small class of parasites who are today clamoring for a great new war. Encouragingly, it does appear that the policymakers in many nations today have taken the lessons of history seriously and are taking actions to mitigate the risk of military conflict. On Tuesday, 30th November, Norway's Foreign Minister Anniken Huitfeldt announced that Norway wants American, British and other NATO aircraft and vessels to keep their distance from Russia's borders. It is important for Norway to be militarily present in our immediate surroundings, but very close to the Russian borders we believe that we do it best ourselves with Norwegian planes and Norwegian frigates. With that, I will conclude this report. Please share this video. In the past I've had my books banned for reporting truths similar to what I've shared in this video, and I suspect that this one could also be a candidate for censorship. Before you go, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. And if you trade, be sure to check out iSystem Trend Compass, one of the best trend following newsletters on the market. You can try it 1 month for free with absolutely no strings of any kind attached. Thank you for joining me on Markets, Trends and Profits channel once more, and until the next time, please keep well, stay free, and I'll see you soon.